Hey, everybody, welcome back to another What Would You Change podcast. We are the Super Monkey Fighters. I am Loki, here with Papa Nugget and Monkey Feathers. How's it going?
Good.
Hello.
How you doing?
Doing all right. So this week, we jumped into Shutter Island, the 2010 film directed by Martin Scorsese, written by Laeta Kalogridis. I apologize. You wrote a fantastic screenplay, and I have terrible pronunciation of names. As well as it's based on the novel by Dennis Lehane. It stars Leonardo DiCaprio, Emily Mortimer, Mark Ruffalo, Ben Kingsley, Max von Sydow, Michelle Williams, Patricia Clarkson, Jackie Earle Haley shows up in this, Ted Levine, John Carroll Lynch, Elias Codes shows up, and I'm sure like 10 other people that are important that you would recognize their faces. Every time it seemed like we turned around in this film, there was somebody recognizable in it. The concept is there's an island in Boston Harbor that had a civil war fort and is now a hospital for the criminally insane. And Leonardo DiCaprio and Mark Ruffalo are sent out there to find this escaped convict who seems to have just vanished into thin air, and nobody knows how or what or why. And then the mystery unravels from there. So I am going to take the point here to say, if you have not seen this movie, go see it before you finish watching this podcast, because to me, spoilers ruin this film.
Yeah, definitely.
And for me, the first time I saw this, I was very excited to see it. And the night before I went to see it, it was spoiled for me. And it was still enjoyable to watch, but I would have much preferred to have not known everything that was going on beforehand. So yeah, watch the movie, come back, watch the podcast. We'll still be here. We're not going anywhere. So with that, let's jump into the things that we liked, aside from it just being a Martin Scorsese, Leonardo DiCaprio movie.
This movie is a movie that I actually really don't know how to feel about. I was trying to think of anything that I actually really liked about it, and I'll give it this. It did have intrigue with a lot of the dream sequences. I found that those were the most fascinating to me because it did kind of feel like, I guess, post-traumatic stress of this guy. Like the subconscious was trying to break out through his dreams with how he was interacting and what he was remembering and what he wasn't remembering. And I always was feeling that the dream sequences were the most fascinating to me because they were over the top a little bit, I would say, but at the same time, you were trying to figure out what this guy was trying to figure out, and his subconscious was trying to help him figure it out as well, incorporated with what happened to his wife with the fire. Because the one dream sequence that I'm remembering is where he sees his wife and the ash is falling around her, and she goes to the window, and then the back of her is burned out, and a lot of things like that. It just, I felt was very fascinating. But again, with this film, I don't have a whole lot that I enjoyed, only because I do think that with this, it's better the first time through if you don't know how it ends.
Yeah.
Because once you see it and then you watch it again, I would say it's still relatively enjoyable, but I would say the first time watch through is probably going to be the best for you.
Yeah, I think, and I think that kind of reflects how the movie's aged as well. Is that when this one was over, what I was thinking is, if you were to ask me which Martin Scorsese movie to see, this one wouldn't even enter my mind. But I think it is. I think it goes down entirely to that, where that's why I gave the spoiler warning. We don't usually do that, but this movie really is not as enjoyable.
It all hinges on
what's going on. It still does get to the end, and that was my favorite part, is that final line of dialogue, which is to me the big spoiler, where that makes the entire film. Mm-hmm. And if they didn't pull that off as well as they did, it would be terrible. Like, to me, it's ultimately forgettable, but that line really makes it good. And
now, what line specifically are you referencing?
Where he says, "Do you want to live as a monster or die as a good man?" because it showcases that he is fully aware of everything going on, and that he's made a choice
to be lobotomized.
Yes, to be lobotomized, and that the only person who kind of gets a hint at that is his partner, his primary care psychiatrist. So outside of that, everything else just doesn't. They do some really good things, but outside of that, you're just kind of like, it's hinged on this mystery, but the movie's really not about that. Like the way that most conspiracy movies unfold, where everybody thinks that somebody's crazy, and then they prove that they're right in that everything that they've been crazy about is true. And this isn't about that. It's about the delusion. And so they pull that off really well, where as you watch through it all, it's like, yes, everything is about his delusion, and it's not the twists and turns, and there's no revelations that there is some grand conspiracy. Every turn he finds less information about his delusion, and he just keeps pushing through it. So I do think they accomplished that, but nothing else really kind of hit hard. Like, it looks nice. I think the period piece they do really well.
And that's what I would say. It doesn't feel like it was shot by an amateur. And granted, Martin Scorsese is not an amateur, but it doesn't feel like it is out of place. It felt very well acted. It felt very well shot. It felt very well. Mm-hmm. But trying to figure out something that really stood out. Because I'd agree with you that end scene is one of the one scenes that stands out and I really like, is because, this guy, he finally figures out that, he is in a mental hospital and he killed his wife because she killed their children. And he then makes the grand gesture that he's going to get lobotomized. And I don't know necessarily his reasoning, but I would say his reasoning is because he doesn't want to remember everything that he's been through.
He's trying to forget it by living in this delusion, and they're not going to allow him. And so he's got to take some drastic steps to be allowed that.
So yeah, getting back, I thought it was shot very well. The period piece was really good. I love the worn elements of the environment. It was all spot on. It made you feel like you were in that time, and the lighting with it all played into the theme. You had very kind of dim, harsh lighting, which you would expect at that time as well, because that was back when the lighting wasn't as good. And if you're talking
their electricity was a bare wire going through the field.
You're talking on an island that is probably even further behind the times than the mainland. So I thought all that was great. With the audio, I felt like they used the dynamic range about as good as you possibly could without doing it wrong. There were very quiet parts of the film and very loud parts with the music, but I never had to fiddle with the volume to be able to hear it. And I would agree with the entire movie does hinge on the fact that you know where it's going to go. If you know that, and I think this is probably my third time watching this, and even knowing that, it's been a while since I've seen it, so it was still enjoyable watching through. And I think I probably pulled out more this time, some of the details watching it again that I probably glossed over the first time, because I think when you first watch it, you're invested in trying to figure out what's going on from the perspective that he is a U.S. Marshal. But watching it again after the fact, that's it. And so you're almost looking for the pieces to verify or validate that, yes, he is a patient, and trying to see it from that perspective. And so you see it a different way, which is interesting as well. And I think either way, it's still enjoyable. And I would also say that these are I like these kinds of films where they're thrillers that make you think, but I feel like this did a great job at balancing what information they actually did give you and what they held back and what they kind of obscured. I think it was, they did a good job with not giving you too much, but not giving you too little. And then they did kind of leave it open at the end, to some degree, but they pointed you in the right direction. That wasn't, it was still a pointed direction. So you should be able to at least come to some conclusion on what that one line meant, but it wasn't.
It fosters debate, I think, which is good. Even if it is like, no, this is probably most likely what happened, it spurs that conversation. And that's, to me, what the ambiguous ending should do, is it makes you talk about the film. You know, you don't come out of it going like, I don't know what I just watched.
Exactly.
You come out of it going, wow, this is really cool. I like this and this and this. And then everybody, it has a discussion about it.
Yeah, because anyone can draw kind of their own conclusion from that, because at least it points it in the general direction, and not just, I don't know, anything could happen. You just make it up. So I think all those points, I think it was very well done.
I think a lot of it hinges on that twist. Once you learn that, it's kind of difficult to go back into the film, and watch it from that.
You're never going to get
same perspective. Yeah, you're never going to have that same example. Because this is probably my third time. Now that I think about it, probably my third time seeing it. And so I think the first time you need to follow the perspective of Leonardo DiCaprio and his journey throughout it. I think the second time, because you know what's up, you're watching it more from maybe Mark Ruffalo's perception or Ben Kingsley's, because they're the ones trying to help. And so during these couple of days, they're feeding into his delusion, and they're trying to help him along. And every other character is kind of a mix of a bunch of different things. Some of them see Leonardo DiCaprio as fear. The patients usually see him with fear because they know what's going on as well, but they're playing into things. And then orderlies and guards and those kinds of things, they kind of see him with disgust or disinterest because they don't really care. They're doing a job. And then there's a couple of the main warden and the other doctor, Max von Sydow. They're more placating him, right? They know what's going on, and they're not going against feeding into his delusion, but they're not really.
They're not trying to help him. Yeah.
Right. They're not really trying to help him. And
they want to see him fail.
Yeah.
Internally.
And that's kind of what it is. And so I think this time watching through it, that's more the perspective that I took it. It was, I saw it more from their perspective and less from anyone else's. And so it was slightly less enjoyable to watch because I was just like, yeah, he is just kind of this angry, violent guy who's just going around terrorizing. And knowing that, if you didn't know the twist and you looked at it from their perspective, you're like, yeah, he comes in and he's just rude to everybody. Mm-hmm. He's forceful. He's angry. He's
sloppy.
He's sloppy. He's not really that good of a detective or a marshal. Like
he looks like a terrible. Like once you see it, once the veil has been lifted, you realize he's a terrible U.S. Marshal.
Yeah. And
well, it's always possible that he's just out of practice because he's been in this hospital for 2 years, and so.
Well, and they play it off from his perspective as he's there for an ulterior motive, right? He's been, hearing about this place and doing those kinds of things. But that's the thing that's usually talked about with this movie after the fact is all of the little subtle hints throughout. The big one is when they first get to the island and the guards take their guns away. Mark Ruffalo fumbles because he doesn't know how to operate. He doesn't know. He's never really done that, so he's not used to it, and so he does that. But
I don't know if this would be a like or a dislike. You could take it either way. But the suit that Mark Ruffalo is wearing at the beginning is like 2 sizes too big for him. Mm-hmm.
It's one of
it's hilarious.
It's one of those things that when we were talking about the period piece, I noticed that this time, their belts are not for they just found these clothes somewhere and handed it to him because they don't quite wear the way that normal clothes wear. But we're getting back to the subtlety on those kinds of things. The clothing is one of those things, but when there's the investigation and they're talking to everybody who is like all of the orderlies and all of the nurses, and they bring up the doctor who went on vacation, and that's Mark Ruffalo, because he went on vacation because he's there as playing a different part. And everybody's looking at him, and he like slumps down in his chair, and like there's a lot of those subtle things that it's really awesome to pick up on the second time. And I guess for me, because the movie was spoiled, that's kind of what I wanted out of this. Is if it weren't spoiled, how much of that would I have picked up on? Because that's one of the things I enjoy about with movies is catching that foreshadowing. And when foreshadowing is done really well, it doesn't spoil anything for me. It makes it more enjoyable. And so I think that's what ruined it the most for me was I wasn't able to pick up on those things because I knew what it was and it was there. And so that's the difficulty for me in the second viewings is I see it and I recognize it and I enjoy it. And it's still enjoyable, but it's not like...
You never get that first back.
It's not that it's a bad movie. It's just it's less enjoyable to me knowing it and, watching through a lot of those scenes. You have to look at it completely differently. You can't look at it as it's the big twist movie because that's really not the point of it. And I'm kind of torn on it. Like it's the big suit for you, Nugget, where it could be a good thing or a bad thing. But in his dreams and his memories, there's always something falling. So there's always the ash. When it goes back to Dachau, there's all the papers flying everywhere. And, it's symbolism of like his world kind of crumbling, I guess. But it's, like I said, it's a good or a bad. It's one of those things I'm kind of mixed on where it's like, I either really like that. I absolutely hated the scenes in the Dachau scenes because it just seemed like there was people standing behind him throwing papers in the air. Like they weren't actually looking through things, right? The ash makes more sense, but
the papers threw me. I'm like, who's throwing all these papers in the room? Like they don't know what they're doing. Like who's in control here?
Are they celebrating? Are they just tearing the place apart? Like what's going on? And because it is a memory and it's his kind of version of events. Like it works for that, but it took me out of the scene several times where it's like, there's just two, PAs standing on either side of him, just out of frame, just throwing paper in the air. Overall, yay, overall, nay.
It's an overall yay for me.
This movie?
Yeah.
I definitely recommend it.
Yeah. I would recommend it as a good first watch.
Yeah.
But I fall in the category of it's hard to enjoy after you've seen it that first good, non-spoiled watch. So I'd say for a good first-time watch, I'd recommend it. After that, you're at your own risk of if you're going to enjoy it or not. Because, for me, it was just, I know what's coming. I know.
I'd put it in the category of recommend, but not like... If somebody asked me, hey, what's a good movie to watch? I don't think it would come to mind, but they're like, hey, should I watch Shutter Island? I'd say, oh, absolutely. It's fantastic. Dislikes. I'm going to start that one off because talked a lot about how well it was shot and the look and feel. There were some scenes where the colors were really tough for me to look at. Where like the greens were a little too green and it just felt a little bit too saturated.
In the normal scenes or in the dream scenes?
In the normal scenes.
Okay.
Like specifically when they first arrive at the island and they're driving up in the Jeep. Things just felt vibrant and unnaturally so.
Yeah.
Like they literally just grabbed the saturation slider and pushed it a little bit too far. So just some of those kinds of things took me out of it. And there were some times where angry Leonardo DiCaprio seemed to be just like the default for this entire film. And that kind of wore me down this viewing, especially where I was just like, all right, he's playing in a game that's rigged against him. And it was just very frustrating for me to watch, knowing that from his perspective, in his delusion, the world's open to him. He can leave and go and do whatever he wants. But everybody keeps telling him like, you're never going to leave this island. You're never going to leave this island. And most of those are his delusions telling him that. But I mean, that's the truth, is that he's never going to leave this island. And, even if he, I guess acknowledges that. That's one of the things I would like to know is like if he had acknowledged his delusion and came out of it, would they have just transferred him to another prison? Like they're not going to release him to the public because he's, a murderer and a violent criminal. Like he's committed as many crimes. Yeah. And so, but then is he going to stay on the island? Because that's the thing is, even if he recognizes it, and then he still lives on this island the rest of his life. It's one of those things where it's frustrating to watch just that futility of it all for him.
And even given the time frame when this movie is supposed to take place, I highly doubt that they would just say, "Oh well, we're going to transfer you to a new prison because you're all better now." It's the 1950s, so he's not likely to ever leave the island, regardless of him acknowledging.
No, but I see. Is it more of a kind of work for the doctors to see if this approach works?
Yeah.
They're trying it, right? They're testing it. They go into the whole and what they used to do is like lobotomize you and all this.
And now they just give you drugs.
Or shock therapy.
And now they give you drugs. So they go through and explain all of that. And so from the doctor's perspective, they're trying to see if they can make a breakthrough in treatment. Regardless of whether he leaves the island or gets transferred or not, I think that's irrelevant. It's not what they're really.
And that kind of validates a lot of his delusion as well, where they're just experimenting on patients. It's like that is exactly what they're doing, just not to the level that he's making it out to be. Like, this is a new way of doing things, and so it's his way of managing just the environment that he's in. So, but it's ultimately that futility for him as a character that's difficult to watch, because the movie is always told from his perspective. You only follow him around. In fact, I think he would be in every single scene of this film. I don't think there's any scene where he's not front and center. Mark Ruffalo comes and goes. All of the other characters come and go, but it follows him throughout all of it. And so that's where it is very much told from his perspective. And so it's kind of difficult to see, to watch it not from that perspective. This was supposed to be Martin Scorsese takes on horror movies, and I don't think it's
I wouldn't
horror
even
movie.
Consider
it's a thriller.
Yeah,
it's a thriller.
But there are some of those shots, like they're not scenes, they're really just shots that add that little element of horror. So it's when they're first walking in, and there's the lady who said, goes shh, and she's missing most of her hair, and she's got a scar, like she's had her throat slit, and like that's the only time you see that person, and it has little to no relevance in the story. And then there's a flashback scene as he's trying to find, was it Andrew Lattis or whatever his name is?
Laetus.
Laetus. Yeah. It's him, but he's made this other person up. It's a flashback, and that's Elias Cote's character plays that, where he's got a slashed face and his eyes, dead. Like, that's a scene that kind of fits that, but it's not a character who's in the movie, and that's it. It's there, and then it's gone. It's just, it's those weird little elements where overall the story doesn't fit that to me. And the tag scene where they're in Ward C, and the guy runs up and says, "Tag, you're it," and then runs off, and then he just chases him down and beats him for no reason. It's also a strange thing where it's the second time a patient brings up how they want to stay there because of an atomic bomb. Like, they've been there long enough to where, the atomic bombs being dropped in World War II, they were in prison for it, or in, under care for it. And so they see the world outside of the asylum as scarier,
more dangerous.
Well, it's because they hear about it, right?
Yeah.
Like they don't really see it. It's like through word of mouth. And so it's been abstracted away, and it sounds like this big evil. They don't have a lot of detail, so they just mentally come up with their own image of what it is.
And it's a weird, like, are the patients trying to help him stay there? Like, what's the point of bringing that up? Because it comes up more than once, and is it just establishing the time frame, or I don't know. I
think so. I don't think there's any real meaning behind it.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
It's just weird. And then it also showcases that his level of violence, because that's right before he meets Jackie Earle Haley's character, whose name I forget, who is a patient that he beat nearly to death as part of his delusion. And so that sets up, here's how, like, the entire time this conversation was happening, he kept saying, you did this to me. And he's like, no, that means that I got him back here because he was out. And it's like, no, he was telling you that you're the person who beat him. And, it just feeds into that as well. And that's like that scene makes sense. But the dude beforehand randomly attacking him. So there's a lot of those kinds of things where it feels like going through the motions for me after knowing the reveal. So those are my dislikes.
I will say there were a few shots kind of with the when they were doing the initial search, or they had the clouds behind them. I think it was like a green screen shot, and it stood out. There were a few shots like that where it seemed a little unnatural. That kind of, at least this time, pulled me out a little bit.
Yeah. I don't know if that was intentional to try and make it all feel like something's wrong.
Yeah.
Or if it was just a weird technical limitation. Because I think that's a process that's been perfected more very recently with trying to think what they call them, like active sets or something like that. It's effectively, it's the way they do The Mandalorian, where it's just a big high resolution screen that's all around them. Which is hilarious because that's how they did movies in the 50s, where they just projected a scene behind people. Like most driving shots in really old movies are that. It's that same concept. It's just, I think, it's been perfected. And so, that's the way it felt to me more is just a technical limitation, or it's a specific look with how they did things, but it would be interesting to know if that wasn't intentional. No, we want this to all seem a little weird just to make you uneasy. So, but it does take you out of it. Like, it's part of that saturation for me.
Yeah.
Where
falls into that category.
This doesn't feel right, and I don't like it. So, I don't like it in a way that pulls me out of the movie. Feathers?
So, the first one right off is the music, and I'm gonna think it's gonna come down more to the mix, but it was very much in your face, like, here's the music, enjoy the music. And it was very distracting when I was beginning of the movie, and I'm just thinking, the music is just in my face, like, either turn it down or do it differently. And it's of course probably like a style choice or just a whatever choice, but it just was very distracting for me in the beginning. And then as it was going throughout the movie, I'm just thinking, well, this music, it just is what's drawing my attention more than the story. And it's distracting me more. And okay, great. What did they just say in the scene? Now I have to go back a little bit. And it just...
It's interesting with that for me because I'm trying to think through. I don't think the music stood out to me other than is it Brahms and he said, no, it's Mahler when he meets Max von Sydow. Like,
yeah.
Which again, seeing it from that perspective of I'm going to go along with what my colleagues are trying to do, but I don't agree with it. Like, you can see that as a scene where he's trying to force a negative reaction out of him because he knows full well what the music's going to do to him. So that's the only time that the music really was memorable to me.
Another thing that I didn't really like was the fact that, and it's coming from, I've already seen this, so I kind of already know what to expect, but it felt like I was walking into a play. Like, these people are being over dramatic and overstaging of this story because they're trying to, it's a stage because they're trying to get this guy to realize what his life is. And it just felt like I was walking into this stage of, here's act one and here's everything that's going on and everything like that. And it just, that's the best way that I can describe it, is it felt like I was walking into a play where these people were acting out this scenario.
Well, that's the thing, is the actors aren't even acting. It's the characters are also acting.
Yeah. Yep. And so that was more of a I would say the first time through, it's probably really great because you're not expecting the reveal at the end. But
I think that's an interesting thing, right? Versus the first time or later, whether you even notice that or not.
well, and that's the problem is I noticed it to where I'm just thinking, well, great, you're a character who's trying to act out this, I guess, delusional experience of this other patient, and you're trying to, play it out so that he'll wake up from his delusions. But it was just, I noticed it, and it just.
Which it's funny to me that because there are some films I've seen that I recognize that a lot of them that are based on plays, but usually what pulls me out of that is they're set in one location or very few locations because plays tend to not switch that up a lot, and so where this one's felt moved around a lot. But I can see how the acting, actors trying to act the way people would act rather than the way you actually act, like kind of fits that way, like. So it's one of those things where, if it pulls you out, it pulls you out, because sometimes just that difference in levels of acting can change that for you. So, sometimes a really good performance in a bad movie can stand out in a negative way, sort of a thing.
And it's not even a bad performance, but knowing the twist, I'm now seeing it as, oh, these are just characters who are acting. Mm-hmm. Instead of actors who are acting and playing a part in a movie.
Yeah.
So that was...
the way that stands out to me is really obvious is all of the guards, because the guards don't care about any of the patients. Like, they see them as prisoners, and that they see the crimes that have been committed, not the afflictions that befall them. And so the guards' indifference to them really stands out more for that kind of negative side of things. The one that stands out in the positive for me, though, is when they're in that group with all the nurses and orderlies, and Leonardo DiCaprio asks if anything unusual happened. I can't remember how he phrases it, but she's like, she's like, everything. Like, we work in in a hospital for the criminally insane. Like, normal doesn't fall under our vocabulary. That scene that they're in is exactly what she's talking about. So,
no, I felt that scene worked really well because it didn't feel staged. It just felt like these people who were doing their job and answering a U.S. Marshal's questions. So it didn't feel staged. So that one I'll say is a good scene. But just some of the other ones, it just felt staged, which is the point. But
yeah, sometimes somebody can accomplish what they're setting out to do and still not hit the mark for some people.
The final thing that was a really big standout negatively is the fact that he's labeled as their most dangerous patient, and yet they're letting him, because it's not explained how he first gets on the boat. You're just dropped on the boat with him, and his primary care physician is there to help monitor him. But he's labeled as your most dangerous prisoner or patient, and you're kind of letting him have the run of the island for 2 days. You don't know what's going to happen, because
but we only see it from his perspective. So you don't know how controlled or how under control he is.
Yeah, because they could have put him on the ferry and then just turned around, gone out, just gone around the island, kind of a thing. But you don't know because you're dropped into it. Like, you're literally dropped on the boat with him throwing up in the bathroom. Mm-hmm. So.
And the fact that he already beat up another patient just because he said his correct name instead of his delusional name. Yeah. And with that in mind, you don't know what's going to happen. If this patient's going to snap. And it's true, you don't know how much control is over him, whether you actually have the armed officers who are prepped and ready to shoot him if he does any significant damage to someone else. But it's just, in my brain, I'm thinking, you're just letting this patient run wild with his imagination, and you don't know what's going to happen.
It's kind of a thing that you can see behind the scenes. They don't directly address that topic, but you can see the conflict between the staff within that, where, there are some of the doctors who are fully for this, and they're like, well, we're on an island. Where's he going to go? like worst case scenario is that he, dies to the elements somehow trying to escape. And I kind of got that feeling from the warden when the warden picks him up and is driving him around. Like, that's the warden's thought, is he's like, I don't know why anybody's locked up anyway. They can't get off the island. Like, whereas Max von Sydow's approach is like, we'll shackle everyone to the floor during a hurricane. If they drown, they drown. I don't care. Like, that's, you can kind of see that conflict there. And so, I think that's kind of more of what that side of the argument was hoping for, is that he would die and they wouldn't have to deal with all of it. But they don't directly address it, and it's one of those things that you kind of are left to fill in on your own. So that's at least that's the way that I've kind of taken it, because it's specifically when he's climbing the wall to go out to the lighthouse. For me, that's the exact thought that I'm having. Is just like, man, they're letting their most violent, like, he just blew up a car and he just attacked another doctor, and like, yeah, this was probably not the best idea, but what's he gonna do? He's gonna be living in a cave on the side with a bunch of rats. Like,
well, the problem with that is he could kill someone else. You're putting the faith in this, I guess, experiment to actually work. He could have killed
a guard. He could have, yeah.
But I think they were trying to risk it to see if they could figure out if that treatment works or not, right? They're not trying to mitigate all risk.
Yeah. And it does look like it worked, because at the end he was very, very aware of who he was.
Yeah.
But even then, you're risking other people's lives to see if this one experiment's going to work. And I can see them not caring if he's only risking other patients' lives, because they're patients, who cares? But the fact that he blows up a car, who knows what could have happened if someone was walking by? Well, oh man, darn, a doctor's dead, or a police officer's dead, or something like that.
But it's after they did that is when they end it.
Yeah, and that's I think that's one of the reasons why they ended the way they did. But it's one of those things where they feel like they have some semblance of control, but they don't necessarily have as much, right? They don't have any bullets in any of the guns. Or it's a plastic toy gun. But I think that's why they reined it in when they do, is because they realize that they can't keep him contained anymore. Like, he's gonna start doing things, and you can see especially within the patients, they're all terrified of him, because he's lashed out at them the most, I think. And so, and for the doctors and the orderlies and the guards, there's a certain amount of risk where any patient in a violent, of any violent criminal can be violent at any point in time, but they are giving him a lot more leeway than they probably should. And I think that's the experiment, and that's why they did it where they did it, and that's why everybody agreed to it. But yeah, this is, I think, one of those weird ones where it's like the negatives aren't really big negatives. And I don't know what I would change. So because I don't think I would change it to see it from any other perspective. I think the story needs to be told from Leonardo DiCaprio's perspective to make sense. Like, if you cut away and follow Mark Ruffalo doing things, you give away too much.
Yeah, you can't.
And you can't. So I don't know if I would change any of that. No, there is one thing I do. Now that I think about that, I would change. The movie opens when they land on the island. It's the assistant warden or the deputy warden who meets them. And he's there for a couple of scenes, and then is just like never seen again. And then like the warden kind of takes over that role. Like, you're not introduced to the warden until like halfway through the movie. And at that point in time, you never see the deputy warden again. So either maintain those characters throughout, build them, introduce them at the beginning and show maybe some kind of conflict with that. There's something else going on there that's just not shown, like maybe cut for time, cut for some reason, but it's like, that's weird where characters just stop being in the movie. Yeah. And somebody else kind of fills in that role.
But
so
I can justify that. So
well, and I like both of the actors, I like both of the performances, and so that's, I would lean more in the introduce both of them, because that might showcase that conflict between the people trying to help and the people not trying to help, because they address it when Ben Kingsley's like, he's a good man, he believes in what we're doing here. He's specifically talking about the therapy that they're trying, but you have no idea that there's another warden there who maybe doesn't.
Yeah, and I think that plays into that whole thing. The warden isn't fully on board, so he's like, "I'll send my deputy to handle this crap. I don't want."
The warden,
and then later on, you meet him, and he's like his warden self, where like they make him standoffish, and then when they do finally come together, he's like let's be real. Come on, let's talk man to man.
Real. Yeah, and it's specifically talking about how he's in charge, and it's the violence. My violence can beat your violence.
Yeah,
like
he's not just on board.
He's
at all.
Yeah, and he's letting him know like his thoughts on the entire situation is, I would just kill you and be done with it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's. You're a violent offender. You're continuing to be violent. You're continuing to hurt people. So I'm going to put you down. Is like, that's his approach. And he says it in a more roundabout way, but he's also speaking in a way that's very clear to him and not clear to other people. So that's for me. That's what I would change. I just, and again, I like both of the actors. I like both of their performances. I would have liked to have seen more of that play up.
I think that what I would change is something that would just make it horrible. Only because I can see the reasoning behind why they did it the way they did it. But I want a film that I can enjoy multiple viewings. I wish that there was another film that I can compare it to that I think did well in the big reveal at the end. But
so the movies with a twist, The Sixth Sense, yeah.
That would be one that I would say, like, you still know the end, but you can still enjoy it with multiple watches.
That's the difference between that one, The Sixth Sense, and Shutter Island, to me, is you watch The Sixth Sense the second time because you're trying to find all of those things that led it in a different direction. I don't think the Shutter Island lends itself to that, because I think by the time you realize there's a twist, you're looking for it. And I think that's the problem with movies that came after The Sixth Sense that tried to do twists. I think it's a lot of M. Night Shyamalan's kind of his decline is you're looking for a twist. And so it's going to be there. You're not going to enjoy the film and be shocked by the twist.
Right.
So, the ones that have twists that I think stand up on multiple repeated viewings would be more like Unbreakable, where there's a big twist in that one at the end. But the story isn't about the twist. The story is about the character learning something about himself. And there's still that character's journey there, where The Sixth Sense is less of that and it's more of the twist. Like, you think that this character's out to help a kid, and then really he's been dead the whole time. And so Shutter Island, I think, kind of falls in between those a little bit. And I don't think it quite lands well on either side of it. So, like I said, still ultimately a positive movie. Very, like, I like it. It gets a little tedious watching it again, because noticing those subtle details was less impactful to me, because it's like, okay, now I'm going to have to spend another 10-minute scene of Leonardo DiCaprio angrily walking through the woods. And like, those are the scenes that took me out of it. And it's like, I want to get back to watching the doctors interact with him in a way that they're clearly telling him something, but he's not getting it. Like, it's not getting through. He's interpreting everything they're saying in a completely different, he's filtering it through that delusion, and they're trying to break through that. So I think they do that very well. It takes work to see it.
I'm still happy with the film. Even watching it again, like with that reveal, it's enjoyable. But I think it's probably because I like movies like this, and I don't think there's a lot of thrillers that do things well. I mean, there definitely are, but it's I feel like this is one that is better than most.
Yeah, and I fully agree that what this does, it does well. And I think that's one of the bigger twists, is the fact that it's you're expecting a conspiracy style movie to reveal itself to be that the person who sees the conspiracy is right, and that's not this movie at all. Like, to me, that's the twist. That's the subversion, is that nope, he is nuts, and everyone else is is true, and he's built this falsehood around it, which I think now that I say that out loud, I think that's an important message for the times we live in. And on that note, we'll leave you guys there. Let us know if you actually did go and see Shutter Island, if you'd seen it beforehand, or if you did take our advice and watched the movie before you watched the podcast. And let us know what we should watch down below. Let us know your thoughts on Ted Levine and on Shutter Island. And we'll catch you guys in the next one. Adios.
See ya.